In just 46 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors went from calm and collected to absolutely furious, tearing off his microphone and storming off a live television set while millions watched in shock. What started as a conversation about faith and family values turned into a brutal verbal battle that exposed something ugly beneath the surface of late-night television. Stephen Colbert, the man who sits behind that desk every night with a smile, pushed too far, crossed a line he shouldn't have crossed, and paid the price when Denzel Washington decided he'd had enough of the disrespect. Before we dive into what happened, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the moments they don't want you to see, and the confrontations that reveal who these people really are behind the cameras. Last night's episode of The Late Show was supposed to be a celebration. Denzel Washington, a two-time Academy Award winner, a man who's been in the industry for over 4 decades without a single scandal, was there to talk about his latest project. The audience was packed, the energy was high, and everyone expected the usual back-and-forth banter that makes late-night television so popular. But what they got instead was something nobody saw coming. A clash that's now being called one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history. The show started normally enough. Denzel walked out to thunderous applause, the kind of reception reserved for true legends. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, looking every bit the distinguished actor America has loved for generations. Colbert greeted him with his trademark grin. They shook hands, and Denzel took his seat on that famous couch. The first few minutes were fine, pleasant even. They talked about Denzel's new film, a passion project he'd been developing for years about faith, redemption, and second chances. Denzel spoke with the kind of measured wisdom he's known for, choosing his words carefully, explaining how important it was to tell stories that uplift people rather than tear them down. "We need more of that in the world," Denzel said, leaning forward slightly. "More stories that remind us what we're capable of when we choose to do right by each other." The audience clapped. Colbert nodded along, but there was something in his expression that seemed off, like he was waiting for his moment to pivot the conversation somewhere else. And that's exactly what he did. "That's beautiful, Denzel, really," Colbert said, but his tone had shifted. There was an edge to it now, a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "But let's talk about some of your other comments recently. You've been pretty vocal about faith, about traditional values, about the importance of family structure. Some people might say those views are, well, a little out of touch with where we are as a society today." The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension immediately, like everyone knew something uncomfortable was about to happen. Denzel's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed just slightly. He sat back in his chair, taking a moment before responding. "Out of touch?" Denzel repeated, his voice calm but firm. "I don't think believing in something bigger than yourself is out of touch. I don't think teaching young people about respect and discipline and hard work is out of touch. Those are timeless principles, not trends." Colbert let out a small laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. Sure, but when you talk about traditional family values, traditional structures, you have to understand that sounds exclusive to a lot of people. It sounds like you're saying there's only one right way to live, one right way to raise kids, one right way to be. "That's not what I'm saying at all," Denzel responded, his voice still controlled but with a firmness that made it clear he wasn't going to be pushed around. "I'm saying that kids need guidance. They need structure. They need to be taught the difference between right and wrong. That's not controversial, Stephen. That's common sense." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he was leaning in harder, and you could see it in his body language. He was enjoying this, like he thought he was about to catch Denzel in some kind of gotcha moment for his audience. "Common sense," Colbert said, repeating Denzel's words with a tone that dripped with condescension. "But whose common sense? Because what you call common sense, other people might call judgment. Other people might hear you talking about faith and family, and think you're telling them their life choices are wrong, that their families aren't valid because they don't fit into your definition of traditional." The audience gave a scattered applause, and that seemed to embolden Colbert even more. But Denzel wasn't having it. You could see his jaw tighten, see him take a deep breath through his nose. "I've never judged anyone," Denzel said, his voice getting quieter, which somehow made it more powerful. I've never said anyone's family isn't valid. What I have said is that we need to stop pretending like everything is relative. Like there's no such thing as truth. Like we can't have standards anymore without somebody getting offended. That's not judgment, Stephen. That's reality. Colbert shook his head, that smug smile still plastered on his face. But that's just it, Denzel. You're talking about truth and standards like they're universal, but they're not. They're cultural. They're personal. And when someone with your platform says things like that, it has weight. It influences people. And some of those people might use your words to justify discrimination, to justify exclusion. Now the audience was really paying attention. Some people were nodding along with Colbert. Others looked uncomfortable, like they wished this wasn't happening. Denzel leaned forward, and for the first time, you could see the anger starting to show through. So now you're putting words in my mouth? Denzel said, his voice rising just enough to cut through the room. You're telling me what I mean instead of listening to what I'm actually saying? That's what this is about? You brought me on this show to lecture me about my beliefs? Colbert held up his hands in a gesture that was supposed to look innocent, but came across as mocking. No. I'm just trying to understand your perspective, Denzel. I'm trying to have a conversation here. A conversation? Denzel shot back. This isn't a conversation. A conversation is when two people actually listen to each other. You're not listening. You're waiting for your turn to talk so you can twist what I say into something it's not. The atmosphere in the studio was electric now. The band wasn't playing. The audience was dead silent. Every single person watching knew they were witnessing something that was about to go off the rails. And Colbert, instead of pulling back, instead of trying to de-escalate, decided to push even further. Okay, let's be honest then, Colbert said, and his tone was dripping with that self-righteous attitude that makes people want to throw things at their television screens. You're a wealthy, successful man who's been fortunate enough to have a stable life, a stable career. Not everyone has that. So when you talk about discipline and hard work like they're the answer to everything, it ignores systemic issues. It ignores the fact that some people work twice as hard and still can't get ahead because the system is rigged against them. Denzel's face went from controlled anger to pure disbelief. He stared at Colbert for what felt like an eternity, and when he finally spoke, his voice was like ice. You're really going to sit there and lecture me about systemic issues? Denzel said slowly, deliberately. Me? You know where I came from, Stephen? You know anything about my life before the cameras? I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My father worked 2 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. I've seen struggle up close. I've lived it. So don't you dare sit there in your comfortable chair, on your comfortable show, and tell me I don't understand what it's like for people who are fighting to make it. The audience gasped. Some people started clapping, but Colbert quickly spoke over them. I'm not saying you don't understand, Colbert said, backtracking slightly but still maintaining that condescending tone. I'm saying that your message of personal responsibility can be weaponized by people who want to ignore systemic problems. Surely you can see that. Denzel shook his head, and you could see the disappointment in his eyes. Not just anger anymore, but genuine disappointment that this was what the conversation had become. You know what I see? Denzel said. I see someone who's so caught up in trying to be right, in trying to score points with an audience, that you've forgotten how to have a real conversation. You invited me here under the pretense of talking about my work, about my film, about things that matter. Instead, you're using this platform to push your own agenda and make me look like some kind of close-minded hypocrite. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's a hit job. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Colbert's smile finally faltered. For the first time since the interview started, he looked genuinely rattled. But instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging that maybe he'd gone too far, he doubled down. A hit job? Colbert said, letting out a forced laugh. Come on, Denzel. I'm asking you legitimate questions that a lot of people want answered. If you can't handle that, if you can't defend your positions without getting defensive, maybe that says something about those positions. That was it. That was the moment everything exploded. Denzel stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. He reached for the microphone clipped to his lapel and ripped it off, the wire snapping as he pulled it free. The sound of the microphone hitting the floor echoed through the studio. I don't have to defend a damn thing to you, Denzel said. his voice booming now, filling every corner of that studio. You don't get to disrespect me on live television and then act like I'm the problem because I won't sit here and take it. You brought me on this show, you agreed to talk about my work, and instead, you ambushed me with this garbage because you thought it would make good television. Well, congratulations, you got your moment. But I'm done. Colbert stood up too, and now he was trying to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The damage was done. Denzel, come on, Colbert said, his voice taking on a pleading quality now. Let's just talk this through. We can have a civil conversation. Civil? Denzel repeated, his voice full of disbelief. There's nothing civil about what you just did. You don't invite someone into your home, metaphorically speaking, and then disrespect them like that. I don't care how many cameras are rolling. I don't care how big your platform is. You don't get to treat people like that and hide behind the excuse that you're just asking questions. The audience was completely silent now. Some people had their phones out, recording every second of this. Others just sat there with their mouths open, unable to process what they were witnessing. This was Denzel Washington, one of the most respected men in Hollywood, telling off Stephen Colbert on live television. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't in the script. Colbert tried one more time to salvage the situation. Look, I'm sorry if you felt disrespected. That wasn't my intention. If I felt disrespected? Denzel cut him off, his voice sharp as a knife. That's not an apology, Stephen. That's you trying to make this my problem, like I'm being too sensitive or misunderstanding your intentions. I know exactly what your intentions were. You wanted to make me look bad. You wanted to paint me as some out-of-touch actor who doesn't understand the real world. Well, it backfired. Colbert's face was red now, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. I think you're overreacting. Overreacting? Denzel said, and now he was moving toward the edge of the stage. You know what, Stephen? That's the problem right there. Anytime someone stands up for themselves, anytime someone refuses to be talked down to, people like you call it overreacting. You can't just admit you were wrong. You can't just say, hey, I messed up. I shouldn't have done that. No, you have to make it about me being too sensitive, me not being able to handle tough questions. That's bull, and you know it. The studio audience was divided now. Some people were clapping, cheering Denzel on. Others were booing, siding with Colbert. It was chaos. Pure chaos. And the producers in the control room were probably losing their minds, trying to figure out what to do. Colbert, his voice strained now, tried to speak over the noise. Denzel, I run a comedy show. We ask hard questions. We challenge people. If you can't handle that, then maybe you shouldn't come on shows like this. That was the final straw. Denzel stopped walking and turned back to face Colbert one last time. The look on his face was one of pure contempt. A comedy show? Denzel said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Is that what you're calling this? Because I don't see anybody laughing, Stephen. What I see is you hiding behind the excuse of comedy to say things you wouldn't have the guts to say in a real conversation. You think you're brave? You think you're speaking truth to power? You're not. You're a bully with a microphone. And the only reason you get away with it is because you've got a crowd that applauds everything you say. The audience erupted. Half were on their feet cheering. The other half were booing so loud you could barely hear anything else. Colbert looked like he wanted to respond, but he couldn't get a word in. Denzel didn't wait for him to try. I'm out of here, Denzel said, and he started walking toward the side of the stage where the exit was. You can finish your show without me. I'm sure you'll have plenty to say once I'm gone. You always do. Colbert, desperate now, called out after him. Denzel, wait. We can work this out. But Denzel didn't even turn around. He kept walking, his stride confident, his head held high. As he reached the side stage entrance, he paused for just a moment and looked back at the audience, not at Colbert, but at the people watching. To everyone here tonight, Denzel said, his voice clear and strong, don't let anyone tell you that standing up for yourself is overreacting. Don't let anyone tell you that having principles makes you close-minded. And don't let anyone use their platform to tear you down just because they can. You deserve better than that. We all do. And with that, he walked off the stage. The studio erupted into complete pandemonium. Some people were standing and cheering. Others were arguing with each other. Security was moving toward the stage, like they didn't know whether to intervene or not. Colbert stood there, frozen, his carefully constructed facade completely shattered. He tried to say something, tried to address the audience, but his words were drowned out by the noise. The camera operators didn't know what to do. One camera stayed on Colbert, who looked like he'd just been hit by a truck. Another camera panned to the side stage entrance, where Denzel had disappeared, as if hoping he might come back. He didn't. The show cut to commercial break, but by then it was too late. The damage was done. The whole world had just watched one of Hollywood's most beloved actors tear into a late-night host on live television, and there was no taking it back. Backstage, according to people who were there, Denzel didn't stop. He walked straight past the producers who tried to talk to him, straight past the crew members who stood there in shock, and straight out the back door of the studio. His security team followed, and within minutes, he was in his car and gone. He didn't look back. He didn't issue a statement. He just left. Meanwhile, back in the studio, Colbert had to finish the show. When they came back from commercial, he was visibly shaken. He tried to make a joke about it, tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal, but everyone could see through it. His hands were shaking. His voice wasn't as confident as it usually was. He stumbled through the rest of the show, and when it finally ended, he practically ran off the stage. The clip went viral within minutes. By the time the sun came up, it had been viewed tens of millions of times. People were taking sides, arguing in comment sections, creating memes, breaking down every word that was said. Some people defended Colbert, saying he was just doing his job, asking tough questions that needed to be asked. But the vast majority sided with Denzel. They saw what everyone else saw: a host who overstepped, who disrespected his guest, and who got exactly what he deserved when that guest decided he'd had enough. This wasn't just about one bad interview. This was about something bigger. It was about respect. It was about the way we talk to each other, especially when cameras are rolling and millions of people are watching. It was about the fact that having a platform doesn't give you the right to tear people down for entertainment. And, most importantly, it was about the fact that even the most patient, respectful people have a breaking point. And when you push them past it, you better be ready for the consequences. Denzel Washington walked off that stage last night, with his dignity intact and his principles uncompromised. Stephen Colbert was left standing there, exposed in front of the world, forced to confront the fact that sometimes the person you're trying to take down ends up being the one standing tall while you're left picking up the pieces. The whole confrontation was a masterclass in what happens when you underestimate someone, when you think you can control the narrative, when you forget that the person sitting across from you is a human being who deserves respect, not a punching bag for your agenda. And now, everyone's talking about it, everyone's watching that clip, and everyone's asking the same question: what was Stephen Colbert thinking?